Hi, Dave Scotland for AE-Tuts, and welcome to another episode of Nuke in Production. In fact, it's our last episode in this 10-part series, and so to top off the series, what I'm going to do is dedicate this episode to squeezing in as many tips and tricks as I possibly can. I'm really going to try to focus on the processes or tips and tricks that can really save you time and really optimize your pipeline and your workflow. I'm going to start in the preferences and have a look at some of the settings within the preferences that can really help you out in this area. I'm also going to have a quick look at how channels should be treated and how to really optimize your workflow by getting rid of or isolating just the channels you need to use in the work that you're doing at the time. I'm also going to have a look at concatenation and how important it is to understand, or at least be aware, that concatenation exists within the Nuke environment, and how important it is for you to understand the order in which things should be laid out in your compositing stream. We'll take a quick look at postage stamps and how we can optimize postage stamps within the node graph. And then we're going to take a look at some pre-comping, fantastic for working in a larger collaborative environment, and also for optimizing the time available on a production by having multiple people work on the same composition at the same time. Now, it's important to understand that a lot of the things I'm going to go through in this particular session, I'm just going to touch on so that you can be aware that those features exist and you can explore them as possibilities with a little bit more detail. I certainly couldn't fit in all of the valuable tips and tricks that I've come across in my time using Nuke, but I'm going to try to include as many as I possibly can and try to keep it as brief as possible so that I can cover a few more. Okay, let's get started. So we'll start with some keyboard shortcuts and some hotkey combinations. The first one I'd like to show you is just a simple node replacement. If we look at the transform here, and I've got the blur node here, what I can actually do is select the transform, hold down Control and Shift, and drop it on the blur node, and it will swap the blur node for the transform. So it's a great way to swap nodes in and out of a stream. I'll do that again. Select the node first, hold Control Shift and drop it on the other node, and it will swap it out. And it's a fantastic shortcut for rehearsing or testing scenarios, and then when you're happy with them, to bake them in or swap them in or out for existing nodes within a pipeline. So the next one I wanted to have a look at is how to quickly go through the channels available in a shot. Now we'll use the read 2 over here, and if we come up here, we can see that there are quite a lot of channels here. We did use this in a previous episode, and you can see that there are a lot of channels available within this image. So an easy way to skip through them and to just quickly have a look is to use the page up and page down keys and just highlight the node and then just use page up and page down. So I'm just using page up here, and you can see up in the top left corner that I'm flicking through all of the available channels. That one's the object ID, we've got normals, material ID, lighting, global illumination, and so on. So you can go through all of the different channels, not to be confused with these keyboard shortcuts here, the R, G, B, and A keys, which basically give you your red channel, your blue channel, your green channel, and the alpha channel available in the image. So page up and page down, fantastic way to go through the available channels for any given layer. Another process that I use quite often, especially when I'm building my scripts, you'll tend to create a lot of nodes as you go, and some of them are repeated. Take for instance here, if I jump into this transform node here, and I throw down a transform into the node graph here. In fact, we'll plug on into that one. And then down here, I might do a... let's just put a keyer in. I won't do anything with the keyer, but we're just going to put a keyer into the stream, and then I might put a blur node in there as well, just here, and plug that into the stream as well. So you can see there that I've got a blur going down into a transform, key light, and another blur. So a really quick and easy way to get another node that's exactly the same as the last one you grabbed from any menu is to middle click. Use your middle mouse wheel or middle mouse button to click on any one of these. Notice if I click down here on the deep 3D node, middle click and nothing happens. But if I click on the transform node, middle click, and you'll see that it created an actual transform node down in my node graph. If I had blur selected, I'll do it again. Middle click and it will create a transform node. Middle click up here and it creates a blur node. If I middle click on the keying section, it creates a keylight node. So basically what it does is it remembers the very last operation that you grabbed from these menus, and it keeps it in memory so that when you middle click, it will create a node identical to that last operation, which I do use quite a bit. Another one I tend to use quite a bit is the region of interest. Now up here I can click on the region of interest and it creates this grid here, and then I can move it around, and what will actually happen is it will only render that little region of interest section there, which is fantastic with really heavy scripts. If you've got scripts that are processing quite heavily and it takes quite a long time to buffer or to process one frame, then definitely by using the region of interest you can really cut down that time, and that time is very valuable in a production pipeline. So what I like to do as a fast track way of using region of interest is to use the Alt W. If you just click Alt W, what you can do is actually draw a region of interest. Now this is far easier than it is to, I'll just switch that off, than just clicking your region of interest and then having to move and process. Say for instance I had a region of interest that was over here early on in my footage, and then later on I've done something, then I want to isolate a section over here. I don't want to have to click it, move it over, resize it, buffer it. Instead what I do is just Alt W and then click the region that I want the region of interest to actually process, and it's much quicker. I can just Alt W again, move to a new section, maybe Alt W, click this section here. So this is a fantastic tool. I do use it quite a lot because I do quite a lot of heavy scripts involving a lot of multipass rendering, so I tend to want to get right in and have a look at the edges and really have a look at certain aspects of the multipass, and this is a great way to just isolate a certain section, and you can toggle it on and off very easily to really help your workflow. Another one I use quite a lot is to really give myself a maximum amount of viewport space is the quick tap on the spacebar. So if I tap quickly on the spacebar, whatever my mouse is hovering over will maximize. So it's a great way to really isolate your node graph and have a look at what's going in your node graph. Hit the spacebar again and it will come back. You can do that also with the viewer, and you can also do that with any other tab that just happens to be open. Just rest your mouse over it and tap it. Now if you click and hold the spacebar, it will bring up the right click menu. Another one I do, and this is also to do with real estate, is sometimes I want to hide this information at the bottom of my viewer and this is information at the top of the viewer, and it's really easy to do. All you do is hold down Shift and use the bracket or curly bracket, which is positioned next to the P key on the right hand side of the P key on your on your keyboard. So make sure you put your arrow or your cursor over the top of your viewer, hold down Shift, and you can toggle these on and off using those curly brackets. Another one I use quite a bit is to do with the timeline here, and your middle mouse button is very powerful when it comes to this timeline. What you can actually do is put your mouse cursor over the timeline and use your middle mouse button to zoom in and out of a specific time. So say I wanted to zoom into the region around the 10th frame, I'll just put my mouse over it and zoom right in to that 10th frame area, and zoom right out, maybe come into the frame 48 area. And if I click the middle mouse button anywhere in the timeline, it will fit back to the time that is allotted here on the left hand side. At the moment it's set to global, it could be set to input, and if I just click here, it will actually come back out to its fully extended version of the timeline. You can also Alt left mouse button and drag on the timeline. So if we just hold down Alt left mouse button and drag, we can drag the timeline to the left and to the right. So say for instance I want to go right in on this frame 35, and then I can maybe have a little bit of a look from 35 to 48, or then Alt left mouse button and then drag back to have a look what happens before frame 35, and then middle mouse, one click, and it will pop back and come back here. Now I use that a lot. Now the next one we'll have a look at is just in the properties bin. I'm just going to pull up a couple of nodes up in the properties bin here. If you hold Control and double click on the node, it will actually float the window, and then you can position it wherever you want in your interface. I tend to use a combination of floating windows and docked windows in the property window. So yeah, holding Control and double clicking will actually float it, and if I want to put it back, I can just click the or float controls here, and it will pop back to the properties window. So I tend to use that quite a bit. I will tend to use Control T a little bit as well, which is, notice here I've got 3 panels here, but where I tend to use this is if I have some group nodes, node graphs set up in this panel here, and if I use Control T, I can just toggle between the tabs or panels that are available in this pane here. Very handy for when you've got group nodes or gizmos, or you're constructing gizmos and you've got a couple of group nodes open in these tabs. Another fantastic way to cycle through frames is to hold down Control up in the viewer here and just roll the middle mouse button. If you have a mouse wheel as your middle mouse button, you can certainly roll up and down and it will actually slide through the frames, and it's a great way to toggle between 1 or 2 frames just by rocking back and forward on the middle mouse button, and it's also a good way to very accurately move between frames. This is one I use a lot, and I really wish it existed in a lot of other applications. Alt-C, so basically what it means is I can take any node, I'll take this one here. If I just do Alt-C, what it actually does is it not only cuts the node, it pastes the node all in the one operation. So if I was to take, say, the blur and the transform, and I'll just go Alt-C, it actually copies and pastes in one operation. The amount of times in a session that I Control-C, Control-V, if I could cut that in half by just going Alt-C every time, I'd save myself a massive amount of time over the period of a project. So give it a try. So this is by no means a definitive look at all of the keyboard shortcuts and hotkey combinations available in Nuke. Like I said before, there is a massive amount of them. In fact, I've got an app on my iPad with all of these shortcut keys, and I think it's a great way to help you learn the shortcut keys that are available for Nuke. And there's also the ability to get into the script itself and change your shortcut keys to suit your own way of working. Perhaps you're used to another application. So give these guys a try and definitely open up your world to the shortcut and hotkey combination possibilities in Nuke. Okay, the next thing I wanted to have a look at was some preferences, and there are only a couple that I tend to make sure that I get straight into a new build of Nuke and tweak. But I give you fair warning, go into your preferences and definitely customize your preferences, but make sure you understand exactly the impact of the changes you make. So with that said, that's one of the reasons why I'm not going to go into too much detail in the preferences. I want you to really explore it by using some in-depth knowledge supplied by the Foundry to make good decisions when you are setting up your preferences. So we'll jump in there quickly and show you a couple of fairly safe settings in the preferences. So just go into your Edit Preference menu. And the first one that I wanted to show you, I'm going to jump around a little bit here. The first one I wanted to show you is extremely important if you use the methodology that I've discussed throughout the series, which is B pipe dominance. So when I talk about making sure that the B pipe in relation to the A over B is always the dominant pipe, there is a setting that you can manipulate in the preferences that can really help you out there. If you come down to your node graph tab, right down the bottom, by default, this will be ticked node defaults, new merge nodes connect A input. Now that's ticked by default, which means if I just close this for a second, if I wanted to merge this AE Tutes logo over the top of this read node, I would just hit M is the shortcut and it will bring up a merge node here. Just undo that. Highlight the read node and hit M, and it creates a merge node. But notice what it's actually done. It's piped the A pipe straight into the merge node, and it's left the B pipe available. Now unfortunately, this is just not the way most people work in a node based compositing environment. You try to leave the B pipe dominant. and therefore if I hide and unhide this merge node, then we're going to have a real problem when it comes to maintaining the background. So if I pipe the B into here, we're not going to get what we want. In fact, it's totally not what we want. What we're actually looking for is the B to go into our background and the A to go into our logo. And then if we hide and unhide the merge node by just using our D to deactivate the node, we still keep our background. But in our preferences, what we can do is untick this selection here and then save prefs and just close this. If I get rid of that merge node now with the background selected, if I hit M, you'll see that it is now the B pipe that is automatically connected into my background, and then I can just connect up my A pipe to my over, which is my logo, and it all works perfectly. Now, the amount of time that saves in the process, it can't be understated. So definitely that's one of the first things I tend to do is get into my preferences and switch that setting off. If you're ever wondering why your tooltips aren't there, you may have accidentally switched off the tooltips. But also, tooltips, once you get to know Nuke, can be a little bit of a headache. So you can switch those off and then they won't pop up every time you rest your mouse somewhere on the interface. The script command dialog, at the moment it's set to TCL. If I leave that and close, if I hit X anywhere down in here, it pops up and it's defaulting to TCL, which means I punch in script in TCL language by default. But if I am a Python person, if I use Python, which I tend to use a little bit more than TCL, I would untick that, close, and now if I hit X, it's in Python native. So that is definitely something that I tend to do very early on. Another one that I tend to use sometimes is, or I tend to set, is script loading down here. I like to reopen viewers when loading saved scripts, and that just means that my viewer will be open as well, and I don't have to go through and actually re-establish a link to whatever nodes I want viewed up in my viewer. It just remembers it from the last time I saved the script. And the other one I tend to tick is this use window layout from saved scripts, and that just means if I save that, if I was to close this down and then open this exact script up, this layout would come in as my default layout, and it would come from the actual file itself. Another one I tend to jump straight in and change is this value here, and it coincides with this setting up here in your properties window. I tend to go straight in here and set that to 2, mainly because I tend to work just with the 2 sets of properties here at any one time, and sometimes I'll actually break these out and have them floating in the window as well. But 2 is all I ever tend to use, and by setting this to 2, then it means I don't have to go scrolling up and down to find the default or to find the properties of the node that I'm trying to work with. It's worth mentioning not to change too much in the node colors window here. Just remember that chances are the more proficient you become with Nuke, you are likely to work collaboratively with other people, and these colors actually mean something. So when we're talking about 3D nodes, we tend to look for those red nodes. We've got color correct nodes, which are in this sort of bluey lilac type color, and these colors are actually industry standard, or at least Nuke standard, for the types of nodes that they are. So it's probably best that we don't change too many of these node colors here. In the node graph, I'm just going to mention this, I'm going to come back to this shortly, but there's a postage stamp mode, and if I look at this, at the moment it's set to current frame, and it also has the choice of static frame. Now what that basically means, if I pull this off to the side here, and we'll jump into this here, as I move along the timeline, it's also changing the thumbnail here, the postage stamp, and with big scripts, this can actually become quite problematic and actually take quite a lot of resources away. And it's sort of pointless. If you've got a version of your footage up here, and at any time I can pipe it into my viewer and look at it, I don't really need to see it here. So what I tend to do is set this to static frame, and then if I right or double click on the read node, I can actually come into the node tab on the read node and actually set the static frame number. So I could maybe put that at, say, 30, and it will pop now to frame 30. So I can set the static frame to whatever frame I want, provided in my preferences I've got static frame selected here. And that's probably all I'm going to show you in the preferences. There's a lot more that is available in the preferences. And like I said before, you really do need a thorough understanding of it. And I certainly wouldn't even be able to cover in an entire lesson the power that you have at your fingertips in the preferences for Nuke. But rest assured that there is information at the Foundry website or in the help files that will give you more of an insight to exactly what you should and shouldn't do to customize your preferences to get a better workflow and to get a better environment happening in your Nuke session. Okay, I wanted to take a look at some pre-comping. This is a fantastic feature that Nuke has that allows you to actually pre-comp as an external file. And that basically means that somebody else in the production can go ahead and start working or continue to work on that file. And there's a live link, or at least a link that can be updated by a very simple click of one button. And you can have all of the work that the other person has done in the interim updated into your file and vice versa. So this is a fantastic way to collaborate and to use multiple people in a pipeline scenario in a live sense. I'm not going to go into massive amounts of detail, but I definitely wanted to give you enough of an insight into how it works so that you can explore it as an option. So what I've done is I've taken this file from part 2 in the series, which is the multi-pass compositing. So even though this comp is actually quite simple, you have to imagine that this could potentially be 100 or 200 nodes all feeding into one big massive setup before it even gets to the compositing over the live plate, especially when you're using CG, particles and visual effects. So let's try. We'll keep it simple, but keep an open mind as to how this can apply to much more complex scripts. So what I'm going to do is take all of these nodes. So I'm just going to give myself a little bit of real estate. I'm going to right click in the viewport or select all of the nodes, right click in the viewport and just come down to other, and you can see there that there's an option called pre-comp, and the shortcut key is Control-Shift-P. Just by clicking on that you get this little window or options box here, and what it's asking for is a script path, a script render path, and it wants to know what channels that you want to save, and it also wants to know whether you want to add a backdrop, delete, or make no change to this existing script here. What I'm going to do is set that to delete. I'm also going to give it a location for the script. It's going to be called multi-pass section 1. So I've already created one. I'm going to override it. And I'm going to give it a pre-comp render path as well. I'm going to explain how that works shortly. So same again, I'm just giving it a location. And I'll overwrite my original as well. And just put in a couple of hashes. We'll go for a JPEG. Go OK. And everything else looks alright, but rather than all, and it's very dangerous to just select all, for the purpose of this I just want an RGBA render. I'm going to go OK, and override is fine. And this is what I'm left with in my existing scripts. I'm still in the same script I was in before, and my pipeline, all of those nodes that were making up that multi-pass process, is now represented by one pre-comp node, and these are the settings up here for that pre-comp node. And it's literally just got one output leading into the viewer, but there are ways, I'm not going to go into it in this example, but there are ways to actually have inputs coming into a pre-comp node. But over here I've got a reload button, an open, a render, and then a read file from output. There is an advanced section here, but we won't worry about it. What I'm going to do is actually open this file. So I'm going to have two versions of Nuke open. Before I do, I'm just going to save this. This is going to be my room night master comp. So I'll overwrite that. And I'm going to open up my second version of Nuke now. So here you can see the two versions that I've created. One is my original comp, and it's got my pre-comp node here. And this pre-comp node is actually pointing to, I'll give myself a bit more real estate here. It's actually pointing to this pre-comp, which is the room night multi-pass version 1 comp. And at the moment we're not seeing anything in the viewer because the pre-comp by default doesn't have a viewer node. So we're just going to select the output down the bottom here and hit 1 to pipe it into a default viewer. And as you can see, it's a little bit blown out, and that's got everything to do with the sRGB space. By default, the original comp was in linear space. So you can see here we have a write node. If I double click on it, it's actually the settings that I set up in that one tab for a JPEG render. And there's the location, there's the JPEG render there. And that's fairly standard. The output is not really required, but it does help at an instant to show anybody using this pre-comp exactly where the output is in the stream and where it exits out to become the output over here in our main comp. So let's do something in here. Let's go, say, to this specular here. Just put in a grade node, and let's do something a little bit outlandish and blow it right out. There we go. And we just come up here and go File and Save. And then in my main comp, all I need to do is click Reload. And what will happen is any change in the pre-comp will actually be updated here in my main comp. Now, it is important to note that even though this is represented by one comp, by one node, it is still a live, or at least all of the nodes here are actually referenced into this comp here, albeit externally. What you can do, and it's the reason why there is a write node here, is I can actually highlight this in my main comp, come over to here and click render. And what it'll actually do is render out to the output settings that I set up when I first created my pre-comp. And you can see now it's a different color node. It looks different. It's green, and it actually tells me that it's now a JPEG, which is the file name and output type that I gave it, and that it is set to read unchecked. And basically that means that I can flick between the original pre-comp, which has a lot more detail, and I can just reload here to update exactly. I'll just hide this and then save the file, and then I can reload over here. But if I click my read file output, I can actually see the render that I clicked before, which was literally a render based on the write node in the pre-comp. So I think you can start to understand the power that this has as far as breaking up the workflow. I could literally farm out the rotoscoping duties to somebody in the pipeline while I got on with the multipass compositing, while somebody else got on with the color correction of the plate or plate cleanup. And you could have multiple people working on the same Nuke project or same Nuke file. So it's definitely a very powerful way to work. I'll just switch back to my node there. It's a very powerful way to work, and I definitely suggest that you have a look at pre-comping in Nuke to really open up your collaborative opportunities. Okay, now I wanted to have a look at concatenation, and basically in Nuke it's pretty important that you understand how this works if you're going to be doing any high quality imagery or high quality compositing. Concatenation basically is the process where filtering happens through various nodes, and there is a slight degradation or change in the pixel quality or the way the pixel is presented in the image. Now, basically what this means is that the way you lay out your script can have a big effect on how the final image is actually shown or rendered. And I'm going to show you a very basic example of it just to make you aware of what's actually happening, or aware that something is happening here. And then I suggest that you definitely go into it with a lot more detail by looking through the manual, the documentation that comes with Nuke, and thoroughly understanding how the filter hit process happens in a Nuke script. As long as you understand it, then it's not a major issue. But if you don't understand it, you can run into trouble and not really know exactly where you went wrong. So let's throw up a really simple script here. I'm just going to throw up a couple of transport forms. Just going to pull these off over to the side, and then I'm going to put a couple of grade nodes on there. Now I'm not going to do anything other than just leave them in the stack like this, and you can see that if I pipe a to viewer back to my original image and then do a wipe, so I'm wiping now between the original image and this grade node here. you can see that I'm not getting any degradation in the imagery. If I come in here a little closer, everything looks pretty good there, and it's, you know, there may be some minor sub-pixel issues there, but you would never see them at this resolution, or just about any resolution really. But watch what happens when I set this up a little bit differently. What I'm going to do is use exactly the same, only this time I'll just break that off. I'm going to go transform, grade, transform, grade, transform, grade, and this time I'm going to pipe that into my 2 viewer, and let's have a look at what has happened as a result of that. And I'll just close up some of these properties here so that I don't accidentally grab the gizmo and move the image. Now, with our wipe, we can see a definite change in the quality. Every time there is a transform in the stack, there's a filter hit. And if I double click on this transform here, you can see that the filter is set to cubic, and it doesn't really matter what I set these to. We are going to get some filtering in this process. And on the left hand side over here, we've got the same amount of transforms, but when they're all together like this, what actually happens is the filtering doesn't kick in until the last transform in the stack here. And in fact, I could have a transform here with the filter set to, say, Keys, and then the second transform, the filter could be set to Mitchell. Whatever the last filter is of this little group of transforms here, that's the filter that will actually be used. But the important thing as far as concatenation is concerned is we only get one filter hit here. In this, on the right hand side, which is this somewhat blurrier version of our image, we get a filter, a hit, and then a grade, and then another filter hit. So we're literally getting 3 filter hits down through this tree here. And I think you'll agree that it really takes a lot of detail away from the image. And there's definitely beware of how filtering happens in the stream and how concatenation can actually happen in your image. We have 2 identical stacks of effect nodes here, and we get a very different result. Okay, well, that brings us to the conclusion of this 10-part series of Nuke in production. I hope you've enjoyed it. We've been able to cover quite a lot of the features of Nuke, but as I keep saying throughout the series, it's nowhere near a definitive look at all of the features within Nuke and all of the techniques that are possible with the Nuke toolset. Nuke has got a very strong community out there, and some of the sites that I would recommend is Nukepedia, and of course the Foundry site as well. And I think that if you start the journey with Nuke, you'll definitely be hooked very quickly. It's got a lot of power. It has a very different way of thinking about the task of compositing. We've been able to cover many of the aspects of Nuke that are foreign to people that are perhaps new to Nuke, or that come from an After Effects background. And hopefully I've given you enough of an insight or enough of a glimpse for you to then go on and take your Nuke learning process to the next level. And there's a lot of material online, and I thoroughly suggest that you embark and embrace the power of Nuke and use it. I'll be the first to admit that I do not use Nuke to do a lot of the things that After Effects is very good at, which is motion graphics, definitely multi-clips running on a edit type timeline. I in fact use After Effects for my editing tasks instead of Premiere, but I don't use Nuke to do any of those sorts of things. Nuke has its strengths, it has its weaknesses, and After Effects has its strengths and weaknesses as well. And I thoroughly believe that the best compositing environment at the moment out there, if you want to be a good all-rounder, or if you're more of a freelance operator especially, then Nuke and After Effects put together are a really strong package. So I hope you've enjoyed the series. Until next time, bye for now.